So what really stood out for me when I saw your profile there was the word cultural intelligence.
Mhm.
Right now, for me, I hadn't heard that word before, even though it's probably quite big in your space and you're hearing it every single day. For me, I'd never heard it before. And so I guess I wanted to ask for those listening and for myself as well, what is cultural intelligence?
Well, cultural intelligence is defined as the ability to interact effectively with people from diverse cultural backgrounds.
That's succinct, nail on the head. I love it. And is there, and going back to, because I would love to speak about you and what that means for you and the history of your life, but where did this all start? Like, what was the interest initially in this topic? Like, where did the beginning, the genesis of this begin?
The genesis of the topic. Well, I mean, if I look back at, I was looking at doing a topic for my master's thesis in the mid '90s, and a friend of mine who was here from the U.S. suggested to me I should look at the topic of cultural diversity. So I started reading up on that, and then I came across the field of cross-cultural effectiveness, and it just resonated for me because I grew up in Malaysia. I am of Indian heritage, Indian ethnicity, brought up in Malaysia. And one of the things we learn in Malaysia is to navigate cultural differences very early, because in Malaysia is multi-ethnic. 60% are Malays, about 30% are Chinese, 10% are Indian. So you learn very, very quickly to navigate cultural differences. So therefore, when I read about it, I thought, wow, this makes perfect sense for me. That's what attracted me to it. And as you know, things happen sometimes when you're aligned. Someone put me in front of a client at that stage who were just starting to fly into Asia, and they were having problems with some of their Asian customers, dealing with Asian customers. So they said, "Can you do some cross-cultural training for us?" And of course, being the consultant, I said yes, although not quite sure what I was going to do. And yeah, and it's built from there. So we used to call it cross culture. The
Right.
heading of cultural intelligence was created by two academics in the early 2000s because it just gives us a broader definition of culture and cross culture.
It's interesting because, when you're isolated in Australia, for example, right, and you're working with Australian people and you're doing, say you're in like a physical location of a job that's based in Australia. I think more and more people are obviously working people overseas. You assume that people are going to communicate how you communicate, which is a correct assumption because typically they do. And the shock came for me when I started my own business and started outsourcing, right? I started to work with people from multiple countries across the world, across Asia, other countries as well, outside of Asia. And the first thing you notice is not the first thing, but the thing you notice after some time is that people interpret things differently. And there's a really interesting study. I'm going to paraphrase this study, but it's out of a book called The Social Animal by Elliot Aronson, who's one of the leaders in the field of social psychology. And he says in this study, they got this picture basically, right? And they got people who reside in a country like China, right? Not Chinese descendant, but just people that have lived in China. And they get people who are from Western culture, like America. They show them this photo and they ask them to describe what it meant in relation to the people and the objects in those photos. And generally speaking, the people from America, even the people who of Chinese descent in America, describe the images with language that invoked individuality, and it's centered around an individual then outwards. People from the Chinese culture were about, oh, it's about the community, it's about the whole together. And I found that very fascinating because that trickles through how we do business, and that trickles through my assumption being to how governments relate to other governments across the world and in international affairs and things like that. So it's a super fascinating topic.
It is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So very much that social experiment that you were talking about. It's also described in the Geography of Thought, which talks about how people see the world. So, the description of how we see the world. So culture is tacit, right? So what does that mean, Luke? That means like, whatever your culture is, it's inherent within you. It's in your gut. You just know it's the rules of the game. Okay, so you just know how to operate. And if you think about it as a bell curve, what happens is we learn our culture from our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, our family. And the reason why they teach us the culture is they want us to fit in, right? So we don't want you to be the only kid who doesn't get invited to the birthday party. So, here are the ground rules as such. Now, it doesn't mean you have to like everything about the culture, but you learn the rules of the game. And so therefore it just becomes very tacit and you operate. So it's like a fish in water. The fish doesn't know it's in the water until you take it out. Same with culture. Until you get out of your culture, you don't actually know. You go, oh, this is normal. This is the way everybody operates, right? And then when you travel or you interact, like you say, with people of different parts of the world, you go, oh, wow, they interpret that differently. They explain things differently. Uh, you know, conflict is dealt with differently, etc.
Thanks for watching this clip of the Getting Mental podcast. If you like this clip, check out the full episode here or more clips here.